Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Josephine if you are new here. If you're not new, thank you so much for coming back. I'm very excited for this week's video. This is something that I've wanted to film for kind of a while now, and it's taken me a few weeks to kind of put everything together and put this together in a way that I think will be a really interesting discussion point. This is talking about robots and whether they should have legal rights. I've been seeing a lot of videos on my TikTok especially of robots at different expos and demos, and it got me thinking again about a TikTok that I posted last year, which was looking at an academic paper that was asking, should we extend legal rights to robots? And so when I was thinking about that paper and seeing all of these videos of robots again, I really wanted to make this video. I kind of have a loose script of the things I want to talk about, but there's three overarching things that I want to engage with. The first is the background, so like, why am I thinking about robots, and the first paper that was talking about should they have legal protections and what that means and what that looks like. I also wanted to talk about the current landscape of where we are with the whole robots in the home thing. But then finally, and I think the most important part of this video, is the discussion about labour rights and also what it might mean to be manufacturing the lowest class as we are engaging with robots more and more. And this may be the year where robots are in our homes, not our homes, the average person, but definitely for the super wealthy. There's already talk of this being the year that the first earliest iterations of home helper robots will be implemented and deployed. So I think this is a really good time to talk about this, and if you're interested, please keep watching. So at the minute on my Obsidian, which I'm also really excited to use as like part of the medium for this video. The last time I filmed a video on my desktop, I think I had my notes app and a few things popping up, but Obsidian has been, I mean, I love it. I use it as a research assistant, and also like will be using it as a PhD student as my primary note-taking, note organizing place. And when I saw this canvas function, I was like, yes, this is exactly what we need to like delve into this topic. So here we have this beginning thing of should robots have legal rights, and I just put a few examples of films, TV shows and books where we've seen robots / artificial intelligence kind of engaging with us in the home, and what I guess creatives have imagined that looking like throughout honestly a lot of our media timeline, you know, robots of the future, having them in home, all of this thing. So the most notable one for me is Her. I think about that film all the time. From when I first watched it over 10 years ago to now, I rewatch it, I'd say every other year, but I think about it so often. But moving on, as I said, I was seeing some TikToks of robots at demos and expos and stuff like that, and I wanted to show this video in particular. There was something about the way that robot fell over that made me feel really bad. Like, I was imagining myself doing that and I thought I would feel so embarrassed. So that thought is a big part of it. But then I also saw this video. I just think this TikTok is really funny, so I want to show this one as well.
A kid's gonna come back one day and they're gonna say, Mom, Dad, I think I'm in love with him. And you're gonna say, you're not gonna fuck a clanker. And they're gonna say, Mom, you're robophobic. You're being so robophobic. What then?
So those two videos, I mean, the first one is just like I said, I watched the first one and I felt some level of, not empathy, but I immediately had this like visceral like, oh, if I fell over in front of all those people, I feel so embarrassed. But this is in fact a robot. And then that second video of her talking about what it will mean in the future when we're so used to robots, and the idea of people falling in love with robots, and like, obviously it's a joke, but we've already seen that people are falling in love with their AI chatbots, and so it's actually not that outside the realm of possibility that in the future people who have robots will fall in love with them. And so this brings me on to this paper, which originally it came out in 2012, and this is Extending Legal Protection to Social Robots, the Effects of Anthropomorphism, Empathy and Violent Behaviour Towards Robotic Objects. And so this paper, when I first read it, I was absolutely fascinated by it. I'll be honest, I was initially a little bit skeptical about why would we extend legal protections to robots when human rights are not even something that all humans have. But something that the author makes very clear is, in fact, when they're saying legal protections for robots, they're actually likening them more closely to animal rights as opposed to human rights, which I think is something really important to touch upon. But essentially this paper is arguing that the way that we anthropomorphize robots that are in the home and have even remotely humanoid attributes, we are empathetic towards them, or should be empathetic towards them. And when we're not, if we don't treat robots well, if we get used to treating them cruelly or horribly, or just in a way that you wouldn't really treat a human, it actually might desensitize us and make us more likely to be unpleasant and maybe even violent to other people because we've become so used to being violent to something. But at the same time, I was also reminded of these two books on screen, the Sex Robots and Vegan Meat. In the Sex Robots and Vegan Meat book, I read this many years ago, and again, this is something that I've thought about quite consistently since. One of the main arguments that the author makes in this book when they're talking about sex robots is that they're not actually something that someone would use if they're really lonely and it would help them form better relationships with people. What it will actually do is make it much harder for individuals who use these things very frequently. It will make it really hard for them to have good, normal social interactions with other humans, because the way that these robots are set up, they are set up to feed back positively. They don't respond the way that a human would, and so the way that you treat them is not similar to how you would treat a human, and it might warp the way that you have interactions. And this is quite a similar argument to Laura Bates, what she discusses in her book, The New Age of Sexism. I actually referenced this book in my last YouTube video talking about data ecofeminism, because I think this is a really timely book, and I really think everyone should read this book. It's as fascinating as it is deeply, deeply traumatizing, but a very, very vital read. One of the things that she talks about in this book, specifically the chapter that looks at cyber brothels, is the way that people engage with these robots is going to make it more challenging for them to interact with people. And she also talks a lot about the way that this violence that we see that happens to women in person also happens in like cyber brothels, it happens in the metaverse. All of these digital spaces and artificial intelligence relationships, they all simultaneously mirror the way that we interact with each other, but they also inform the way that we interact with each other. She's of course speaking about this in the context of misogyny, which is not the main thing that I want to talk about here, but I think it's relevant to touch on. And so moving on to the current landscape of robots and why I was reminded of all of these things again and why I want to talk about them right now. So the first thing that has happened more recently that I thought was fascinating is this academic paper, Alexa Shut Up. This came out actually last year, but it only just came across my research exploration more recently. But I also saw this BBC article where it was essentially asking would you let a robot load your dishwasher? And then also this video from the Wall Street Journal, which I don't think I can play that much of because YouTube, but I'm going to play the first couple seconds just so you can see it. But I recommend everyone to go watch this video. It's so interesting, but again, kind of troubling.
It's here, the first humanoid robot housekeeper.
Thank you, Neo.
For $20,000, you can pre-order 1X's Neo robot now, with delivery in 2026.
I think you missed a tiny spot over here.
Just one little catch. There may be a human behind the curtain, pulling the robot's strings.
Yeah, so that video is really fascinating. It's about 9 minutes long. I recommend everyone to watch it. I'll probably link it either on screen or below. I also saw this TikTok, which it's not letting me play it at the moment, but it's essentially asking whether you would let someone come and clean your house for free. And what it is that people come to your house, they cook and they clean, and they have these little cameras on the top of their head. And essentially it's creating training data to be sold to AI companies that are developing these robots, which I thought was really interesting and really weird. I can't link the TikTok, but again, it was fascinating. And I thought it was interesting that it came up on my feed literally today. And then also, like I said, this BBC article that essentially is looking at the different robots that are allegedly on the market or in theory on the market for this year. There's Neo again. He is, when I first saw the picture of Neo, I was like, I don't know if I think that's adorable or horrifying. I'm more leaning towards horrifying now that I look at it again. But yeah, these are the robots, and it's essentially talking about the different companies, the development phase, what they're being used for. But I want to go back to this paper, this Alexa Shut Up. So this paper, Alexa Shut Up, is essentially looking at children and parents who have voice assistants in their home and the different ways in which adults and children communicate with their Alexas or the voice assistants. And essentially one of the findings was that parents reported that the children spoke and engaged with their voice assistants less politely than they would. And the authors talked about a few things about the relationship they have with the voice assistant and how much that informs how polite or rude they are to it. But when I saw this paper, my first initial thought was, if you're a young child and you are rude, or you ask a question and you don't say please or thank you, the average good parent would say you need to say please, you need to say thank you. But when you're engaging with a voice assistant, you actually don't need to do that. There's no feedback that tells you you need to say please, you need to say thank you. And actually, one of the things that this paper talks about is how saying things like please and thank you, hello, good morning, all of this, the way that you would interact with a person actually is unhelpful to the voice assistant, because it's essentially filler words that it has to filter out before it can actually get to the root of what it is that it's being asked. And so engaging with a voice assistant, especially from a very young age, would actually teach a very impolite communication style to young children. And so again, this is building this idea of what does it mean to have something in your home that you don't treat as a human because it's not a human, but the way you engage with it and the way that you feel about it actually might be a lot closer to the way that you feel about humans than you might consider. Going back to the original paper, the extending legal protections to robots, one of the things that the authors said was that the way that we would treat something that looks like a human or humanoid shaped or animal shaped is really different to how we would treat a toaster, for example. So you wouldn't say please or thank you to a toaster, but when you speak to Alexa, some people do say please or thank you because it's a conversation. You're treating it like you would kind of a human. And this paper essentially gets to the root of what it is that I'm really interested in this video, and that is, what does it mean to engage with something that is human adjacent but not fully human in your home? If you have something in your home that you don't have to say please to, you don't have to say thank you to, you don't have to be polite to, you can push around, shove it around, treat it horribly, there might not be any repercussions directly, but it's quite likely that that will change the way that you go and interact with other humans, because you'll become so used to having a thing that you can treat like this. It will be really hard to unblur the lines between how do we treat people versus how do we treat robots. Some people might not necessarily agree with this idea that we won't be able to distinguish how to treat a person versus how to treat a robot, but some of the earliest evidence that we're seeing of closely related things kind of tell us that this is true. If we think about the way that people are having conversations with their chatbots and how that's actually changing the way that we have conversations with each other, even language is changing because of the way that AI gives responses. So there's a lot of words that are actually becoming repopularized because AI models use them more frequently, and then we as people who consume AI ourselves use them more frequently as well. It's this really weird thing where we're simultaneously telling the AI and the robots how to be, and they are also telling us how to be, and we're kind of training each other at the same time. And it's not necessarily going to be for the best if we're training AI to say we don't have to treat you the way that we treat people. In turn, we will end up treating people the way that we treat robots. It sounds like a reach, but I really think that this will happen, especially as the first early adopters of robots and these sorts of technologies will be the wealthiest among us. One of these robots, the Neo that was in this Wall Street Journal video, I think it retails for about $20,000, or you can rent it for $500 a month. My first thought when I heard those figures was, I don't know why you wouldn't just get a cleaner, because I feel like you could afford it. If you have 20k to just like drop on a robot that doesn't even work, it's not even fully functional yet, you're more buying into an idea rather than actually something that will be fully functional in your home. When you have that sort of money, you definitely could just hire someone. But the question is, why wouldn't you hire somebody when you clearly have the money? What do you benefit from having a robot versus a human? And that brings me on to my final part of this video, the thing that I think is the most important thing that we kind of consider, and that is manufacturing the lowest class and what this means also from a labour perspective. So before I was saying about if you had the money, $20,000 that you could spend on a robot that isn't fully functional, what would you benefit or gain from paying for a robot that does not do 100% of what you need it to do, when you could just hire a person? And ultimately what it comes down to is the fact that you don't have to treat a robot the way you treat humans, because there's no legal incentive, there's no rights for robots. And this is the heart of this video, right? It's, if you can have a robot that you can say anything to it, you can do anything to it, and the only limit at the moment is, right now it's capabilities, but longer term the only limit will be how much battery life is in it, how charged is it. That's a really dark place, because there will be people who absolutely abuse the fact that robots will not be trained to say no. They will never ask for sick leave, they'll never need maternity leave, you don't have to feed them, you don't have to make sure that the place that they're working is appropriate, clean and sanitary. You don't have to do these things because they're not human. And there's actually, in my opinion, that's one of the best reasons that we should have some form of legal protections for robots, because if people feel like they would get a robot so that they don't have to treat a human well, that essentially tells us how people who are hiring feel about the working class. I also think that treating robots in this way would make it really challenging for people who still work with humans to disentangle humans versus robots. So if you have a robot that's in your home and you can tell it to do all of your laundry, all of your cooking, all of your cleaning, playing with your children, doing your ironing, all of these like household domestic labour things that quite frankly all of us hate doing, and you can have the robot do those things quickly, no complaints, efficiently, the exact way you like it, and you didn't really have to do much more than prompt it, you're going to become really frustrated when you say go into the workplace and you have a co-worker who you give them a task and maybe they come back to you and they have follow-up questions, or their workday finished at 5 and so they didn't finish the task as quickly as you wanted them to, or they've got annual leave booked and so the task takes longer to do because they're a human. I think that a lot of people will start to struggle with understanding the boundaries of humans when they have robots in their home. And then it won't be much longer until people think, okay, how can we get a robot to do these sorts of jobs? So at the moment, it's not that easy, but for the sake of this video, it's relatively easy to get a robot to do a lot of these, like, blue collar jobs, as they're labelled here. And then artificial intelligence, we're seeing people who have more corporate roles, those are being replaced by AI systems wherever possible. And there's a real push to use AI in our work. I know for me and my company, they're really big on trying to get us to use Copilot for loads of things. I've spoken to my housemates, and again, they're really being pushed to use AI for lots of things. I kind of don't know anybody who has like an office type job who doesn't have to use AI in some way, or is at least being pushed to use artificial intelligence. And so what we're having is people with blue collar jobs, AI, people with wrong way around, people with white collar jobs having to use AI, and people with blue collar jobs being replaced by robots. What then happens to the mass of people who then are unemployed? A lot of countries don't have good welfare systems. A lot of people are already struggling with unemployment. Graduate unemployment rates, at least in the UK, are the highest they've been for a very long time. And I imagine it's only going to get worse if people can't even have some of those more physical, manual jobs that they do before getting the sort of office job that they want. You know, when you go into a supermarket now, there's a lot of self-checkout as opposed to having a person self-checkout. And that's an area where we've already seen a mass amount of job losses because people have in some way or another been replaced by robots. We've seen how negative that has been for a lot of people who previously relied on these sorts of jobs. I actually understand from a scientific perspective and an engineering perspective why you might be interested to see what can we do, what can we create. But I think creating these things without any type of proper governance or guardrails, I think we're slowly marching into a place that will be really damaging for wider society. The work that we do, whether that's in an office or in the home, whether that's being a homemaker or having an office job, all of these types of work are important and valuable. And I think having a robot in your home do some of these things will make it a lot harder for us to respect people's work. And I think when we don't respect people's work and we don't respect people, I think our societies just crumble. I think in a lot of ways we've already seen that type of judgment or mistreatment of people doing certain types of jobs. I think having robots become this class of beings, it only stands to reason that it will make a lot of these social interactions that we have much worse. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is very, very briefly, is when you have a class of beings, I'm going to say beings so that can include humans and robots, when you have a class of beings who are doing work that is maybe undesirable for the lowest of wages or the worst conditions, it forms this weird imbalance within societies, and then that group of people becomes really marginalised, and it can really stoke up a lot of hate and discomfort between the other groups that are the lower class. We've seen a similar thing in a lot of ways with immigrants coming into this country in the UK, doing jobs that quite frankly a lot of British people wouldn't want to do. And I'm not saying there's going to be human-robot race wars, but I do think it's interesting to think about what will that mean for people who used to do a lot of these jobs who are now unemployed, and the only thing they have to blame is robots. Will they blame the robots or will they blame other people? I honestly don't know. I'd be interested but scared to see the answer. This video was honestly just a lot of my thoughts around the changing and developing landscape of domestic robots. This is a conversation that I think a lot of people should be engaging with more deeply, because I think it's going to really change the way that we interact with each other and how we view work and what it means to do good work, what it means to have value in our work, what dignified work is, I think robots will really change the way that we engage with all of those things. And I think prior to that happening, maybe there should be some kind of governance or protection put in place for robots, but also for us and our society, so that we still maintain those social graces of what it means to treat each other fairly, equitably, kindly. And there just needs to be some kind of infrastructure. I think we've already deployed AI en masse without critical questioning prior to its deployment, and I think in a lot of ways we've seen really negative repercussions from that. Before we do the same thing with robots, I think there's an opportunity to ask some of these questions about, well, how is this going to change the way we treat each other? How is this going to change the way that we work? How is this going to change the way that we think about work? How are we going to value work? If robots are doing a lot of it, does this mean that a lot of us will get to finally frolic around and do the things that we're actually passionate about? If I believed that, then I would be all for it. But because I don't think that's the case, I think it's really necessary to question, why are we developing robots to do a lot of this domestic labour? Who really benefits from this, and how might this shape our societies in ways that ultimately we end up not being happy with? I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please be sure to like and comment. I'd really love to hear people's thoughts about this, and as always, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one, and thank you so much for watching.